Hello everyone, this is Eden Toftari, and this is my presentation, The Lockheed Scandal. Let's get going. So, what happened that made Lockheed Scandal become a scandal? As we all know, between the 50s and the 70s, Lockheed had financial struggles that made them um, be desperate for um, any kind of contracts, mostly foreign contracts. And so they had paid between 22 and $38 million in bribes, mostly to officials in Japan, Netherlands, Italy, and West Germany. And it wasn't just that the U.S. defense contracts made them uh, be very unstable, and in order to secure these aircraft contracts, they had to pay bribes. Involvements who were part of it, who were the main actors, I should say, and how these actors made the impact be bigger than it was supposed to be, in quotation marks. So, first and foremost, the Lockheed executives, the top leadership, mostly were the ones who were involved in that. The taxpayers, in indirectly, the taxpayers were involved because, as we all know, um, the state was basically allowing uh, um, Lockheed to do what they did, and not just that, because Lockheed was a contractor for the U.S. military and the defense contracts that they had with the USA at the time. The taxpayers paid basically indirectly to Lockheed. So for some reason, a lot of people would say that the taxpayers were involved in that, which I can see why, but it's not really the case. It was just the taxpayers' money that was used by the government. So the really biggest involvements were Lockheed's executives, the foreign political elites like the Japan Prime Minister, the Japanese Prime Minister, the Italian government, there was Germany leadership. Um, And as we said, the taxpayers. Now, why it was so important, why the impact was so much bigger than it was supposed to be. Well, as I said, the taxpayers' money was given by the U.S. government to Lockheed. So basically, the government backed um, Lockheed to do what they did, and it became a fallout for the U.S. government, a very big political fallout. As Japan's prime minister was arrested too, there was a bit of political fallouts, not just with the USA, but also with Japan and between the two countries. There was huge tension between the two countries politically. Now, why was it more than just bad behavior by Lockheed and by the United States? Well, a lot of people could see this scandal and these results and say, oh, some top managers or something like that, the executives, um, that's their fault, they did that. But it's a bit different than that because if you think about it, it's basically a corporation that does what the hell it wants with the back of the state allowing them to do whatever they want. It's um, the best way I can describe it is that it's like the country was encouraging the company to do what they did. They did it by giving incentives, not incentives for bribes, but the more contracts they had, Lockheed, the more money they got from the US. So basically, Lockheed said, okay, we're gonna get more contracts by paying them, and then we get more money from the US. Now, there were weak regulations. We know that there were non-existing laws against bribery, and we know that even the ones that weren't against bribery, but they were very weak. And like I said, the state corporate dependence is a very big player in this scandal. Now, we know that this case represents in the best way what the state corporate crime is, right? Um, During this semester, we were talking about both Cleanard and Jaeger, and they describe it the best way. But this case is basically the example of what they try to say. Basically, when corporations and governments work together, right, in ways that produce social harm. Lockheed, like for example, were embedded in the industrial and military complex and relied on the U.S. for survival, on the U.S. like the government. So they were in a bankruptcy situation. The U.S. government pulled them up by letting them bribe foreign governors. So I can see why there was such fallout politically for the US afterwards. And basically, when you think about it, because the government was also relying on Lockheed, the same way Lockheed was relying on the US because it's their military contractor, they had to reduce oversight and accountability. Now, why bribery was normalized? Well, if you look at Lockheed's perspective, it's very clear why. They were in financial troubles. They got basically backed by the US government. They could do whatever they want without consequences. Why not do it? Makes sense. But when you think about it, why did the US government thought it was a good idea? I mean, nobody came out loud and said, "Yeah, we don't want to prevent crime." But if you think about it, letting things like that go through makes no sense internally for the US government. It's like shooting your own foot in a way. But there was a big saying in one of the articles that I read said, too important to fail. Look, it was that important for the US that no matter what, they had to stay alive. So that was like, we're gonna look the other way in hopes that you're gonna pull yourself back together and maybe then it will change. But it never happened. Now, after the scandal, what were the short-term consequences? Well, as we all know, a lot of arrests across the entire world, whether it's Japan, Italy, Netherlands, West Germany, or the United States. Um, a lot of coverage publicly. The SEC started investigations to see what actually happened, and diplomatic struggles for the US again against China, uh, against Japan, against Italy, Netherlands, and West Germany. There were a lot of tension, a lot of tension between those countries right after that. Now, for the long-term consequences, as we all know, in 1977, the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act uh, began, basically became a thing after 7 years of after Lockheed's scandal. Basically, we know that the SEC and the Senate and the Department of Justice all together came up with the FCPA, and that reform basically, as much as it helped, it still is a problem if you think about it, um, because the enforcement is still uneven. There's still a lot of power with corporations, especially politically, where they can influence and have close ties to the states. If you think about Elon Musk for a second, he contributed, if I'm not mistaken, $500 million for Trump's administration. There is no way Trump is going to go against him at some point, right? Because he contributed so much to him, so he basically owes him now. There is a lot of things like that that still happen to this day, which is why it's still a problem. And we're going to talk about it later more. Now, why is it still in talks? Like I said before, um, the problem with the law is that the law reacts. We never have a law that is preventing something. It's always after something has happened, now we're going to make a law to ban that thing. But we cannot predict things that are going to happen. And so the law is always behind, and that's why it's so hard to regulate on things that never happened before or that were never looked at as a problem. Now, there's always a problem with manpower and labor, which creates weak enforcement. And so the regulations and the regulators are not strong enough to enforce the law. And as we all know, the white collar crimes are not accidental. What happened with Lockheed is not an accident. This is a choice. This was the Lockheed scandal. Thank you.